Welcome back, viewers, to the latest researches and news. Today, we have major updates from Ethiopia and a major strategic shift in the Ethiopian war that changes the entire picture on the ground. First of all, we will update you about the Ethiopian military is withdrawing from rural areas across Amhara, Dowunt in North Wollo, Kalela in South Wollo. The countryside is being abandoned. Fano has entered Dowunt and is showing the images. Secondly, about the Ethiopian National Defense F is concentrating in urban centers and highway corridors, Kobo, Woldia, Desi, Kombocha, Debre Bihan. What this strategic retreat reveals about the federal government's real military position. After that, we will update that more than 15 police personnel have defected from an Ethiopian National Defense Force training camp in South Wollo, walking away before they even completed basic training. The army is losing soldiers before they reach the front line. And lastly, about Sudan Brave update. Viewers' reports from credible sources on the ground confirm what many analysts have been watching build for weeks. The Ethiopian National Defense Force has begun withdrawing from rural areas across the Amhara region. The withdrawals are not being announced publicly by the federal government, but the evidence on the ground is clear. In Dowunt, North Wollo Zone, Ethiopian National Defense Force forces have pulled out. No major battle preceded the departure. The military left, and Fano fighters moved in. Images have been released by Fano forces showing their presence and control of the area. In Kalela, South Wollo Zone, the same pattern. Ethiopian National Defense Force withdrawal from a rural area. No significant fighting reported during the movement. The military simply pulled back. This is important to understand in context. The Ethiopian National Defense Force has been fighting Fano in rural Amhara for 3 years. It has launched major operations in the Chok Mountain Range, in Dega Damot, in Dembesha Zuria to hold strategic positions. It has deployed artillery, drones, and air assets to try to maintain control of areas that Fano has been contesting. And now in some of those areas it is living without a fight. Why? Because holding isolated rural positions has become a liability. Small Ethiopian National Defense Force units deployed in rural Wollo are vulnerable. They can be surrounded by Fano. Their supply lines can be cut. Their communications can be disrupted. And when the larger conflict with Tigray People Liberation Front forces erupts, those isolated units become targets that cannot be reinforced quickly enough. The federal military has made a strategic calculation better to abandon the countryside now on their own terms than to have isolated units destroyed piecemeal by Fano when the bigger war begins. But here is what that calculation costs. Every rural area the Ethiopian National Defense Force abandons becomes Fano territory. Dowunt is now under Fano control. Kalela has been forgotten. The resistance is filling the space the federal military is leaving behind. The countryside of Amhara is falling to Fano not through dramatic battles, but through the slow, steady recognition by the Ethiopian National Defense Force that it cannot hold what it once claimed to control. Now let us look at where the Ethiopian National Defense Force is concentrating after these withdrawals, because the pattern reveals the full scale of the strategic shift. Military movements confirm that Ethiopian National Defense Force forces are being repositioned toward a specific set of urban centers and road corridors: Kobo, Woldia, Desi, Kombocha, and Debre Bihan. Look at these locations on a map and the strategy becomes immediately clear. These are the major cities of North and South Wollo, connected by the main highway that runs through the spine of the Amhara region, from the Tigray border in the north down toward Addis Ababa in the south. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is no longer trying to hold the countryside. It is building a defensive chain along the highway. Urban centers as fortified positions. The road between them as the supply artery. Additionally, operations continue specifically along the Kobo to Kobo Robit corridor. This segment of the road is being actively secured because it represents the most vulnerable section of the supply line, the area closest to the southern Tigray border, where Tigray Defense Force units could potentially interdict movement. What does this strategy tell us? It tells us the Ethiopian National Defense Force is preparing for a defensive war, not an offensive one. It is not planning to push deeper into Fano-held territory. It is pulling back, concentrating forces, and preparing to hold the urban nodes and supply routes that it considers essential for what comes next. Analysts watching this development are clear. This repositioning reflects preparation for intensified fighting involving both Fano and the Tigray People Liberation Front simultaneously. The federal military no longer believes it can manage a widespread rural presence, while also preparing for a potential Tigray People Liberation Front offensive from the north. So it has made a choice. Cities and highways. Everything else let Fano take it. From the resistance perspective, this is a significant victory, even without a single additional battle being fought. Every kilometer of rural Amhara that the Ethiopian National Defense Force abandons is a kilometer where the resistance now operates freely, where Fano can move without harassment, where supply lines between Fano zones and between Fano and Tigray Defense Force become easier to establish and maintain. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is shrinking its perimeter, and a shrinking perimeter is the first visible sign of a military that is losing the strategic initiative. Now to a development that adds a deeply revealing human dimension to the military picture. In Mekdela Woreda, South Wulo Zone, more than 15 police personnel have defected from an Ethiopian National Defense Force training camp. They did not desert from the front line. They did not flee from a battle. They walked away before they even completed basic training, before they were ever deployed to a fighting unit. Here is what happened. Police personnel were recruited from multiple districts across the area and transported to the Gimba Training Center for integration into Ethiopian National Defense Force units. On the first day of that process, 8 of those police recruits transported from Mekane Selam City deserted the training camp immediately. The following day, 7 more police personnel from Mekdela Woreda defected from the same program. 15 people in 2 days refusing to become soldiers before their training even began. This matters enormously because it is one thing for combat veterans or frontline soldiers to defect after experiencing battle to cross to the other side after seeing what war actually is. It is another thing entirely for recruits to look at a training camp and decide they will not enter it. These were people who had already been recruited, already transported, already assembled, and they still left. What does that tell you? It tells you that the fear of fighting for this government, the fear of what it means to be an Ethiopian National Defense Force soldier in Amhara right now, is greater than whatever pressure or incentive was used to bring them to that camp in the first place. The army that is concentrating in urban centers for defense, that is withdrawing from rural territory it has held for 3 years, that is using nighttime raids to force civilians into service, is now also losing its recruits from training camps before those recruits ever fire a single shot. This is not a crisis of equipment or numbers alone. This is a crisis of will. And no amount of repositioning or strategic planning can compensate for an army whose own recruits are walking away. A brief update from Sudan. The Sudanese armed forces and their allied units report the destruction of dozens of Rapid Support Forces vehicles during recent operations in North Kordofan, with several additional vehicles captured. These claims have not been independently verified. Fighting continues across the region as the Sudanese conflict enters its third year with widespread displacement and a severe humanitarian crisis continuing to affect millions of civilians. We will continue monitoring Sudan as events develop. Let us bring tonight's picture together because it is a picture of a war that is shifting in a very specific direction. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is withdrawing from rural Amhara. Dawunt is under Fano control. Kalela has been abandoned. The countryside is being handed to the resistance. The federal military is consolidating along a defensive line Kobo, Waldia, Desi, Kombocha, Debre Behan, protecting cities and highways instead of territory. This is the strategy of a force preparing to defend, not attack. And from a training camp in South Wulo, 15 recruits walked away rather than become soldiers for this government. The army is losing people before they reach the war. From the resistance perspective, Fano and the Tigray People Liberation Front, the picture has never looked more favorable. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is retreating from the ground. Its recruits are defecting. Its strategy has shifted from expansion to survival. The war is not over. The cities still need to be contested. The highway corridor is still defended. Hard fighting remains ahead. But the direction of this conflict, who is advancing and who is pulling back, has never been clearer than it is tonight. We will keep watching every development. Like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update from the front line.